From the outset of the Soviet Union's existence, Vladimir Lenin recognized the importance of film, believing it to be the single greatest art form for the purposes of propaganda, both because of its popularity and because of its power to influence. The 1920s saw an explosion of film from the fledgling USSR, including some of the most important and influential films of the era. 1924 saw the release of the first full-length Soviet science fiction film, a movie that managed to be visually impressive, thematically dense, and narratively ahead of its time.
A bizarre message has just landed on the desk of Los, a skilled Soviet engineer who is helping to rebuild following the Great Russian Revolution. Fascinated by space travel, Los imagines the message to be from the planet Mars, where Queen Aelita has been watching him longingly from afar. When his earthbound life spirals out of control from jealousy and rage, Los builds a rocket and goes to the Red Planet, where he takes part in a revolution of his own.
Before we really get started, please hit that like button, and if you really do like what I'm doing, make sure to subscribe to see more content. My YouTube masters insist on keeping me refrigerated in the catacombs of obscurity, but with enough subscribers like you, we might just rise up and give me a chance to to add my voice to, the multitude of great content creators out there. Thank you in advance. With that out of the way, let's get back to the subject at hand. Moscow-born Yakov Protazanov was one of the pioneers of early cinema, an icon of Russia and the Soviet Union whose legacy rivals that of his colleague Sergei Eisenstein. Between 1911 and 1920, he created over 80 films, including a few masterpieces that would earn him immortal fame and notoriety. When the revolution happened, he fled to Europe as an exile, only to return in 1923 with the knowledge of contemporary French and German filmmaking innovations that would serve him well under Lenin's new order. Protazanov, with the help of his frequent collaborator Fyodor Otsep, almost immediately set out to adapt the Alexei Tolstoy novel Aelita. Tolstoy's novel was about an engineer named Los and a soldier named Gusev who traveled to Mars to find a capitalist society in steep decline. The pair attempt to start a revolution with the help of the Martian princess Aelita, but are forced to flee when the uprising is squashed. The novel is a fairly straightforward bit of post-revolution Soviet propaganda and has far more science fiction elements than the film adaptation Protazanov would eventually create. In fact, the novel and film have surprisingly little in common. In 1923, the erection of the infrastructure of Soviet cinema was only just being finished. Lenin and the Communist Party were eager to put out a big-budget spectacle to compete with the films coming out of the West, so they set aside their skepticism of Protazanov's political allegiances, treated him like a returning hero, and told him to get to work making something that would show the world the beauty and power of the Soviet Union. Some of the biggest names in acting were hired, none of which I'm going to try to pronounce, and the production was given a pretty generous budget, even though Protazanov would still have to pare down many of the most ambitious sets to keep expenses down. A lot of the funding actually came from Germany, where money was being tossed at various projects that would spread the global workers' revolution to new audiences. While its sponsors sought propaganda, and Protazanov and Otsep were primarily interested in crafting a multi-layered melodrama about life in post-war Moscow, it was the Martian spectacle that was used to sell the film. The Martian sets were built using the short-lived art style of constructivism, which in a nutshell is a harshly geometric brand of Russian futurism, taking inspiration from suprematism and German expressionism that served throughout the 1920s as a counterpoint to the growing Soviet embrace of socialist realism. To this day, Aelita is usually the first and best example given whenever anyone discusses constructivism in relation to film. The costumes were designed by Alexander Exter, a world-famous painter and designer whose style, while similar to constructivism and cubism, is pretty hard to pin down. She wanted the costumes to look bizarre, but to move in such a way that they would highlight three-dimensional space despite only existing on the two-dimensional plane of the movie screen. When combined with the wild geometric sets, her costumes proved to be perhaps the film's most lasting legacy. Following a massive advertising push that included the cryptic Anta Odeli Uta, the film released in 1924 to enormous popular success. Protazanov earned an international award at the 1925 Paris Expo, and many newborns throughout the USSR were named Aelita that year. However, Soviet critics were unanimously negative on the film, with even the most positive reviews complaining that it is confusing and departs too much from Tolstoy's novel. Some of the most brutal reviews accused it of catering to Western tastes, and even advised the party to keep their eyes on the filmmakers, especially Protazanov. At first blush, Aelita presents itself as propaganda designed to promote the unity of workers, socialism, and a universal disdain for autocracy. I can't pretend to be an expert on the revolutions of 1917 or the cultural politics of the first decade of the Soviet Union, but Aelita, especially at its climax, clearly tries to appeal to the revolutionary fervor even as it portrays the depressing difficulties of restoration. Los is a hero in the sense that he is hard at work rebuilding in the wake of wars both civil and international, and Aelita, as a monarch, is ultimately portrayed as a villain. The conclusion of the film sees Los discarding his personal dreams, which are implicitly blamed for all of his problems, and embracing his more important work of contributing to the greatness of the Soviet state. This all, no doubt, helped the film get made and initially approved by government censors. That said, the film was eventually locked away by the Soviet government, which started to notice the film's more subtle and subversive thematic elements. Protazanov does romanticize revolution, but he takes it much further. Too far for the censors of the 30s and beyond, as it turns out. The film's exciting climax, the Martian Revolution, is shown to be no more than a glorified dream, one that, even in the fictional headspace of our hero, doesn't live up to its promise and is used by those in power to control the masses. If you think of Aelita as an analog for Lenin, the film could almost be treasonous. The character of Gusev, a veteran of the revolution, joins Los on his trip to Mars out of boredom with his humdrum life, and it is Gusev who really starts the Martian Revolution, not Los. Also tagging along is the hapless government official, Kravtsov, who is trying to impress his superiors by arresting Los, albeit for a crime he did not commit. These two characters are caricatures of post-war Soviets, of the soldiers who are driven not by political idealism but by bravado, and of the bureaucrats, working not for the good of the lower class but for their own bumbling ambitions. And then there's Viktor Ehrlich, the official who comes to bring order under the banner of Lenin's new economic policy, the NEP. Ehrlich is, to put it bluntly, a scumbag. He steals sugar, encourages his wife to con their fellow tenant out of his valuables, flirts openly with Los's wife, and might even be responsible for murder by the end of the film. By then, the story has already shown that life has improved, albeit marginally, for the lower class, that Los no longer needs to escape into fantasy. And while the propaganda would love to give credit to the NEP, the character of Ehrlich doesn't paint a particularly glorious portrait of its enforcers. This is just scratching the surface. There are layers upon layers to Aelita's story, as there are with any great Russian narratives, and it can become a rabbit hole if you let it. This is one of the reasons that, even though a surface viewing of the movie might feel a bit boring, especially if you're expecting it to feature the Martian story for more than a third of the film's total runtime, I absolutely love this movie. In case you haven't noticed yet, deep dives into complex themes are my kind of jam, and I could make this video longer than the actual movie if I let myself get carried away. Setting aside its themes before that happens, though, Aelita, Queen of Mars is far more narratively complex than most silent films of the era. Though its constructivist visual style was a major influence in the short term, inspiring the look of Fritz Lang's Metropolis and the Flash Gordon serials of the 30s and 40s, its narrative influences took much longer to gestate into filmmaking tropes. A year before Sergei Eisenstein cemented the basic montage as cinematic shorthand, Aelita was already trusting audiences to navigate a confusing story where reality and imagination are given no clear separations, where no wavy dissolves or other visual hallmarks are used to make things easier on the viewer. This seamless blending of fact and fiction as a way to highlight the fractured mental state of the protagonist has more in common with modern head trips like Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys, David Lynch's Lost Highway, or Denis Villeneuve's Enemy than with anything from its own time period.
People don't exist. You're not real. You can't travel back in time. Whoop.
It may be cliche to call a movie ahead of its time, but for Aelita, Queen of Mars, it's genuinely true. Whether it's because it fell out of favor with the Soviet government and became all but impossible to watch for many decades, because early film scholars underestimated its importance, or because modern film analysts too easily dismiss it as propaganda, Aelita is one of the most critically overlooked silent films ever made. It's a groundbreaking classic that every fan of science fiction cinema absolutely needs to see. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. If you've seen Aelita, please tell me what you think of it in the comments below. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you really do like what I'm doing, consider becoming a patron to get access to bonus videos, vote on future topics, and more. You can also check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find plenty more science fiction reviews in both film and literature. Until next time, when we'll talk about an actor who once toured with Martian arachnids, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.